All right, this lesson is on hinged animation and swapping symbols. This type of animation is the kind of animation you would use when you want a one-time occurrence of something, like a character walking on the stage and then him waving just say once, or blinking his eyes or opening his mouth once or twice, something like that, something that you don't want to repeat. Now, this type of animation happens directly on the timeline, and it is for one-time occurrences, things that aren't going to need to repeat, because in that case you would use nested animation with hinging in it, but that's a separate lesson, okay? Now, hinged animation is where something is hinged and it will then rotate somehow and somehow require hinging, okay? All right, swapping symbols, which will also show, involves one symbol being swapped out for another one, like in the case of a closed mouth swapping out for an open mouth, or a closed eye swapping out for an open eye, okay? So we're going to show you that as well. All right. To get started, we have this robot, and if we double click on him, we'll notice that he's drawn in object mode here. That's good. That's the way that we've asked you to create things. One habit to get into, you don't have to do this for every single symbol that you create, but it's good to do if you know that you're going to be animating parts of it separately, whether now or in the future. So what I like to do is basically save this into its different parts that I plan to animate, okay? I'm going to go ahead and create a folder here in the library, and I'm going to be inside my robot symbol, okay? So I'm going to go and create a new folder, and in here I can do robot parts, okay? And I can grab all the parts and compartmentalize them based on how I want them to animate. Now I know that I'm going to want some blinking eyes, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have both eyes blink at the same time, is the way that I'm planning it. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of these eyes. And I'm just going to go ahead and right click them, convert to symbol, and I'm going to call them eyes. I'm going to make sure it's on graphic type and centered. That's all I need for what I'm going to be animating. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to grab the mouth because I might change that one. And I'm just going to go ahead and right click them, convert to symbol. And I'm going to call it mouth. And again, graphic, centered registration, hit OK. I'm going to grab the head, the nose, which isn't going to move, and the neck all together. And I'm going to call that head. And then I'm going to hit OK. And I'm not worried about this having moved to the back because I can just right click, arrange, and send to the back. Okay. I'm going to grab this here. Left arm, I'm going to hit OK. Right arm, and I'm going to repeat the process. All right, and I'm going to grab all of these symbol parts and I'm going to drop them into this robot parts folder. All right. Now, basically what I have here, if I open up these parts, I have the different parts that I could potentially animate separately, okay? The key is that if you want them to animate separately, if you plan on making this wave, or if you plan on making these eyes blink or whatever, you need to be able to have them on separate symbols so that you can animate, okay? Remember, we need symbols for animation. All right, so what we have here is we have all the different parts. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate a few of these parts and just change them up a bit. Like the eyes, for instance. I know that I'm going to need eyes that are going to be closed, so I'm going to go ahead and right click on here and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to call this one eyes closed, okay? And then within this eyes closed, I'm going to double click on it. Now I'm inside of it here. It's in drawing object mode. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, with my transform tool, and I'm going to make these be what I call shut. But what I notice is that they now position themselves down here, and that's fine if that's where I want them to be, but because this is going to be a swap image, I want them to be replaced right where the other ones were, and because they were centered registration, I know that if I move these up, I'm going to move these up with my arrow key right around there. Okay, so we'll go from that to that. We look at it here, that to that. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and get out of that. I'm going to go into the other one that I want to manipulate, and this is the mouth. The mouth is like this. I'm going to duplicate this mouth. Duplicate it. Mouth. And this one I'm going to call mouth open. And I'm going to hit OK. And on this mouth open, if I double click on it, I'm inside of it now. It looks the same. I'm going to go ahead and just open it. And then again, my registration, I just want it to be, well, maybe not that much. Here we go. Just want it to be centered there with that registration point. Okay, so that way when I use the swapping effect, one replaces the other, and it'll go like this if we look at this preview here. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and get out of that. I'm going to go back into my scene. Okay. So technically I have all my parts. This is the key. The key is to try to build all of your parts ahead of time. You always want to anticipate what you're going to do and build all of those pieces. These pieces will help you when you start animating, okay, and you need to change certain parts of them. The big robot will help you when you just want him to move all together. For this example, we're actually going to just create like him waving once directly on the stage, and then we want him to blink, and because everything that we want to animate is constantly changing in that character, we don't do it as nested animation, we just do it here on the surface, okay? All right, so I'm going to start off by renaming this layer here that is called robot, okay? And on this layer here, I'm going to grab the robot and I'm just going to drag him in. I'm going to position him off the stage. I'm going to right click, insert a frame. I'm going to activate this, right click, create a motion tween. I'm going to go to the end of the animation and I'm going to position him where I want him to be. Okay? So I have him here. At this point, he's just coming in from outside the stage and he's moving into the middle of the stage, okay? With a simple motion tween, which you should be familiar with. All right. Next, we want him to become all his separate parts so that we can animate different parts of him individually, okay? So I'm going to create a new layer here. And this one here, I'm going to actually call robot waving parts, all right? So now what I want to do is at this particular point in time, this object here, he's at the exact same size that I want him in the exact same position. Everything is perfect. I'm going to go ahead and copy him from the stage, okay? Just so that I remember all the attributes such as his size, his place, you know, that type of thing. And then in this robot walking parts here, one step over, right here, my goal is to get this robot one step over from here. And we're going to go insert keyframe, and it's blank, okay? But now when I go in here and I go edit, paste in place, you want to make sure you select paste in place. It's going to paste him on his own layer, okay? Now he is the whole symbol, all right? And he is made up of all of these little symbols here. But as a whole symbol on the stage, I can't animate all of his parts separately. So what I want to do is now that he's on his own little area here, I want to right click and I want to break him apart. Now you'll notice I broke him apart into all of his separate little symbols, okay? And even though I have him into separate pieces now, and in theory I could move this here, like this, okay? I can't really animate him just on one layer because you can't animate multiple symbols on one layer. You need to have them all on their own layer, or at least the ones that you plan to manipulate, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this particular symbol that I want to change, and then also the eyes. I'm going to hold down shift, and then also the mouth, because these are the ones that I'm going to potentially change, okay? The other ones I'm just going to leave stationary. And I'm going to, with those objects selected, I held down shift to multiple select the pieces. I'm going to right click, all right, or control click on a Mac, and I'm going to say distribute to layers, okay? And now what you notice is that it actually put all of these pieces in their own separate layer, okay? But things are starting to get a little bit messy, all right? So what I like to do is I like to create a new folder here. I'm going to create the folder at the top, and I'm going to call it Robot Animating, okay? And I'm going to hit return. And I'm going to grab all of these pieces, and I'm going to drag them and drop them inside that folder. All right, now they're inside that folder. If I fold this, it's going to get a little less messy, okay? All right. Now, problem. Right now, we're getting all of this to happen because things are on their separate layers. What we want is we want this part of these layers that created themselves right from the behind back here. We want them to only be visible here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select that first frame, and I'm just going to move it in to the edge here. I'm going to click on it, make sure it's selected, and then click and drag. It's a little tricky. You got to click on it once, make sure it's selected, and then drag. You see that little white square right next to it. Okay, and now everything is right there. Now you'll notice when we go here to the end that certain things appear to be missing, which really is just that the layer order is off on this. So I'm going to go ahead and rearrange these so that they make sense, okay? Waving parts, the mouth, here we go. All right, so now we have this animation happening here, okay? Then we have all of these layers here with the different parts that are just exactly in that same place. And that's what we want. We want it to be seamless. At this point in time, if we just want him to blink or to wave or do something different, all we need to do is just continue animating like we did before, okay? We're just going to do some nested hinging this time. All right, so the right arm, we know that we want it to move separate from the body, all right? All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and with this robot waving parts, just because it's the whole robot, all the different pieces, these are not going to be animating, so they're just stationary. Remember, you can keep a bunch of stationary parts together like this, not a problem. I'm going to go ahead and go to about here, and I'm just going to go ahead and right click, and we can say insert frame, okay? Because they're not going to be moving, they're stationary. They're all fine on one layer. No need to create more clutter in your timeline. You can just keep it like this, okay? On the other hand, though, this one here, the right arm, it's going to animate on its own, so we need it on its own separate layer. Now, what we can do is we can create a hinged animation on this one, okay, so that it can wave. First thing we're going to do is make sure that we're on our transform tool here. We're going to change the hinging point to here, so that when it rotates based on that hinge point there, okay? I'm going to put it back there. I just changed the hinge point, okay? Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the timeline here. Depending on how long you want it to last, you can choose your own amount of time. I'm going to insert the frame so that it's just visible. Now I'm going to activate it to create a motion tween so it's activated to animate. And I'm just going to go to the endpoint here and I'm just going to say here. Okay. Now if I want to change this and add more points, I can do that. I can say actually here I want it to be here, and then down over here I want it to be down here. Okay, so you can still modify it, all right? Now we have this. We basically have him coming in. At this point, we have him waving, okay? You'll notice there's some missing parts because we haven't animated these yet. All right, now at this point, I want the eyes to be visible for a little while, say to here. I'm gonna insert a keyframe, all right? And now what this gives me is it gives me all of this frame where it's visible, and then a separate frame. You'll notice there's a little line, like a cut line right here. A separate frame with these eyes here, but separate, okay? And now what this allows me to do, the reason that I inserted a keyframe instead of a frame is because I wanted it to chop it up for me here and insert this on its own frame. But now what I can do is I can select this particular object here on the stage at that particular frame. And if I go to my properties palette, I get this option to swap the symbol. Notice if I don't select it on the stage and I just select it here, notice I don't get that swap option in my properties palette. But if I select it on the stage now, I'm basically telling it what I want to replace with this. I can go to swap, and because I had already created this eyes closed here and I made sure to register it, I can go in here and I can say okay, and now it's going to swap to that one. All right, so it went from here to here. Now, this is just 1/12 of a second, so it's pretty small, okay? So we don't want it just to be visible for 1/12 of a second closed, because otherwise you virtually won't even be able to see it happen. So I'm just going to go ahead and extend the timeline here. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to insert another keyframe so that I can then swap again to the open eyes symbol. Then here, in this new keyframe that it created for me, I can go and I can select these eyes here. I can go ahead, swap again, and then I can swap back over to the open eyes, which are these ones, and I can go ahead, okay. All right, and then I'll just go ahead and extend the timeline. I don't want to animate anymore, so I'm just going to do insert frame. I don't really need a keyframe here. Okay, so what we have right now is this. It stops here. At this point, it breaks apart into its pieces for those things we want to animate. The hand waves. This is just a motion tween. And then here we're having swap actions. Visible for a little bit. Open it back up. And then waves the arm. Okay? All right. So at this point, basically we've done some swap. Now the mouth, same thing. If you want his mouth to also open and close, then what we can do is we can go in here. I'm going to do it at the same time. I'm going to do a right click. Insert keyframe. Creates that open spot for you. I select the actual piece within that frame. I go to swap. I swap it for the open mouth. I hit OK. I go down the timeline, insert another keyframe, swap the object for another piece, the mouth regular, and then I go in here, and now I just insert a frame since I don't want any more animation to happen. Okay, so now it's coming in. breaking apart into its different layers for the pieces, waving the hand, swapping the eyes and the mouth, swapping the eyes and the mouth again, and back to normal. Okay? At this point in time, if I want the robot to go back to its normal position, because everything is in the same exact spot here, I could either create a new layer and reinsert it in here, which is probably easiest, or I can create what we call blank frame. So I'm going to go ahead and create a blank frame here. Insert blank keyframe. This will give me an empty frame in here. And what I want to do is I want to create a blank keyframe here. Insert blank keyframe. And what that will do is it'll create an open spot here of blank keyframes. Okay, so you have to designate the start point by inserting a blank keyframe in here. And then you travel down, and then where you want it to have the blank keyframe where you can then put in your robot, you can place him back in here. Okay, so that'll allow you to do that. When you insert another blank keyframe, it'll create all this open gap for you. Okay, now I know that this really didn't move from where it was positioned here when it was whole, so my easiest bet is to go to this particular location here, edit, copy, okay, and then I'm going to go in here, and at this particular point in time, I'm going to do edit, paste in place, okay. Now because I left this guy's arm here a little bit off, when it goes here, it's just going to jump to that, but that'll still look pretty decent, all right. So this is how you create animation. And then if you just want to continue animating him, you would right click, insert, frame, activate this guy to move by a motion tween, move it to the end of your timeline, grab him and move him off the stage. Okay, so if we go from the beginning, here's what we got. Symbol together, separate to animate separately, and symbol together. Okay. Okay, so this is how you do hinged animation and how you swap symbols to create kind of one-time animations directly on the timeline. If you are looking to create animations that constantly repeat, like if he was waving a lot of times, or if you want his feet to constantly be in motion, then you want to look at the video on nested animation with hinging, okay? That one will show you how to automatically do that so that it repeats, so that you only have to do this once inside of a symbol, and then it'll automatically repeat when you put it onto your timeline. That's a separate video, okay? So make sure to take a look at that, since one example of that is required as well. All right, this concludes your lesson on hinged animation and swapping symbols. If you have any questions, please make sure to contact me.